It is 2018, and Godzilla 98 officially turns 20 years old. To commemorate the anniversary, it makes sense for me to review it. Over the last 20 years, I kept hearing from people asking why this film is hated by Godzilla fans. Naturally, the people asking were not Godzilla fans. But even recently, the same people ask why Shin Godzilla is praised while Godzilla 98 is despised, since both films do something different with Godzilla, and both films are equally polarizing. Hopefully, this review will answer those questions. To start off on a positive note, the first act is actually one of the few highlights of the movie. The first 30 minutes actually feels like a Godzilla movie. In fact, the first act takes some cues directly from the original 54 Godzilla, with ship disasters, an island attack, etc. Godzilla's first appearance in New York is also executed wonderfully. They managed to hide parts of the creature while still delivering a chilling presence. The build-up and delivery is handled very well for Godzilla's New York debut. Unfortunately, all of that falls apart once we get into the second act. As the rest of the film unfolds, we come to the realization that this film is nothing special. The entire film feels like one big cliche of American monster films rather than Godzilla films. The plot, characters, and the monster itself are generic. The characters offer very little to hold our interest. Matthew Broderick's Nick Totopoulos is only there to study the creature and offer the film a poorly developed love story. Nick's only true purpose is to deliver the twist that Godzilla is pregnant. Other than that, Nick is useless given that very little is revealed about him for audiences to invest in, aside from the fact that Audrey rejected his marriage proposal. Audrey is worse. She is given so much potential to expand as a character, but those opportunities are swiped away in favor of having her complain all the time. Audrey has the drive to become a reporter but doesn't take action. Her friends push her to do the stuff she's unwilling to do. Audrey could have worked as the main character. She could have been this movie's version of Steve Martin and had her do some investigating of her own, but instead, she's second fiddle compared to the other characters. Animal is one of the more entertaining characters. He's funny, witty, his role is fine the way it is. General Hicks is unbelievably generic. He is the cliche military archetype typically found in monster films. He's always angry and shouting orders, which is the only thing General Hicks provides. Jean Reno is great and criminally underused. Felipe was the only character I found interesting, and I found it frustrating that his role wasn't explored more or expanded upon. When these characters are criticized, 98 fans are quick to attack characters from the Toho films, claiming they're not any better, but in my opinion, they are. Take Godzilla 54. You have Emiko, a character who had an arranged marriage with Dr. Serizawa, but fell in love with someone else. You also have Dr. Serizawa, a scientist who was literally and figuratively scarred in World War II and questions the ramifications of a new weapon he accidentally discovers. He goes so far to commit suicide so nobody forces him to replicate it. Take Monster Zero. You have an alien who was bred to follow a computer's orders but falls in love with a human and even risks death just to save him from her overlords. Or take Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. You have a group of characters who are incompatible with each other but have to work together in order to survive. Or Return of Godzilla. You have Dr. Hayashida, whose parents were killed by Godzilla, but he learned to forgive the monster and chose to study him rather than kill him. You have the Prime Minister, who has the weight of Japan and the world on his shoulders when he has to choose whether or not to use nuclear weapons against Godzilla. So are the Toho characters better than the characters in Godzilla 98?
Since you ask my opinion, my answer is yes.
The plot was even more frustrating because of how unoriginal it is. A nuclear test mutates an animal into a giant creature and now terrorizes a major city. Sound familiar? That's because every monster film from the 50s and 60s have already done it. Yes, the original 54 Godzilla shares that same plot, but it did something different with it. Ishiro Honda took a cliche concept and reinvented it to provide a strong political commentary. Godzilla 98 borrows that same concept but does nothing different. The plot has more in common with the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms than Godzilla. Both monsters attack ships, Both monsters attack New York in daylight and destroy only one building. The military's first attack on the monsters happen at night, and while they don't kill the creatures, they do make them bleed, and the only way to kill the monsters is by trapping them. While Godzilla 54 did take inspiration from Beast, Godzilla 54 had an identity of its own. This film doesn't. Roland Emmerich has tried to connect his film with the original Godzilla, stating, "Many of the elements in our movie, like the scientists trying to discover how to destroy him, or the military trying to blow him to Kingdom Come, is all from the original film." But again, that's the plot to every monster movie ever made. How are those elements any different from Dem, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Gorgo, the Giant Claw, or Q the Winged Serpent? But all this fails in comparison to how Godzilla was treated. First, let's get into the design. The design itself looks cool for a monster, but for Godzilla, that's a hard sell. Patrick Tatopoulos designed Godzilla this way because he didn't want to disrespect the original by altering it, which is a noble sentiment, but Roland Emmerich has claimed that he changed the design because the Toho Godzilla design didn't make sense to him. Despite that it looks like a xenomorph T-Rex hybrid, the design would have been fine had they treated the character properly. The original Godzilla wasn't just a bland generic monster, he was a character. He was a destroyer, a force of nature, a hero, and a symbol. But they all had many things in common. Godzilla was destructive, indestructible, and hard as nails. Godzilla 98 isn't. He's literally just a big animal. Patrick Tatopoulos himself even stated that they were creating an animal, not a monster. Which was a big mistake because that's what sets Godzilla and King Kong apart. Kong is an animal, and Godzilla is a monster. What they did was take all the iconic elements that made Godzilla what he is and replace them with inferior elements. Instead of fighting back against the military, Godzilla runs away. Instead of having atomic breath, he has flammable gas. He migrates to New York to lay eggs. Instead of withstanding missiles, this Godzilla is easily killed by them. This Godzilla can catch a helicopter, but it can't catch a taxi. This Godzilla doesn't even destroy New York, he just walks around. In Godzilla 54, Tokyo was literally flattened, but by the end of Godzilla 98, New York is still standing. All of these new elements don't strike Godzilla 98 as a unique monster. All of this was in the name of realism, but this is not how you do Godzilla realistically. You don't strip him of the outlandish elements that makes Godzilla what he is. Instead, you take those outlandish elements, put it in the real world, and watch how the real world reacts to those outlandish elements. The climax with the babies is polarizing. Once we get into it, the movie suddenly stops feeling like a Godzilla movie or even a monster movie and feels more like a Jurassic Park ripoff. Even the design of the babies looks strikingly similar to the velociraptors. The ending boggles me. When Godzilla chases the main characters, Emmerich wants us to fear Godzilla and root for our heroes, but when Godzilla is killed moments later, we're suddenly supposed to feel sorry for him when we were just rooting against him moments ago? And moments later, we're happy he's dead? This is just poor directing. It blows my mind how some 98 fans overglorified this film. I agree it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely no masterpiece. I think nostalgia is a factor when 98 fans overpraise this film. They are so blind by nostalgia that they cannot or choose not to see the film's flaws. Overall, Godzilla 98 is a terrible Godzilla film, but as a movie itself, it's not bad, but it's not good either. It's excruciatingly mediocre at best. There are a few good things, like the first act, the humor is decent in some parts, and the practical effects look great, but it's not good enough to save the rest of the film from the flaws bringing it down. Emmerich clearly didn't care for Godzilla, and it shows. Take Independence Day. That was a well-made, brilliantly directed film by Emmerich. It's exciting, funny, chilling, action-packed, full of surprises. It's a damn good movie. You can tell Emmerich was passionate about Independence Day, but with Godzilla 98, all that passion is gone. Emmerich just couldn't handle Godzilla, so he had to reinvent the character in a way he was able to handle, and it didn't work. This was just another paycheck for him. Godzilla 98 suffers from poor directing, a generic plot with cliche characters, and an unforgivable reinvention of cinema's greatest monster. But still, this film has some replay value for me, mainly because of nostalgia, because I grew up with this film. And because of that, I award Godzilla 98 the mercy score of 2 stars out of 4.